Great. Good afternoon. I'm Beth Brzezinski, president of GP Women. Before we begin, I just wanted to make a few announcements. First, as you can see on the screen, GP Women has several upcoming events that we would love for you to attend. Next Wednesday, a week from today, we are doing a social event. It's a meet and mingle at Big Red Barn. We sent out the announcement today, but like us on Facebook if you didn't get the email, or you're welcome to shoot one of us an email. Try to RSVP, but if it's Wednesday night and you're hungry and want free dinner and you haven't RSVP'd, please show up anyway. We do have a lot of food ordered. And then also we have the future collaborative events between GP Women and PCCW. Julie Cumble will be speaking on November 9th on imposter syndrome. And then the dates for the spring semester are here as well. So moving on, speaking of today, thank you all very much for attending this collaboration between the Graduate and Professional Women's Network and President's Council of Cornell Women in conjunction with the Johnson School's Women's Management Council, the Women's Law Coalition, and the Graduate School. We are very pleased to present Breaking Barriers to Women's Advancement, Stories and Lessons from the Front Line with Beth Horowitz. Beth is former president and CEO of American Express Bank of Canada, as well as former president and general manager of Amex Canada Incorporated. From 2002 to 2007, she chaired the Amex Bank of Canada board. In 2009, Beth was appointed to the HSBC Bank Canada board, and in late 2012, she was appointed to the board of Aimia, a global leader in loyalty management and customer analytics with operations in over 20 countries. In addition to these corporate boards, Beth has served on numerous nonprofit and for-profit boards over the past 14 years. Of particular import for today's talk, she currently serves on the advisory board of Catalyst Canada, a leading nonprofit organization with the mission to accelerate progress for women through workplace inclusion. Beth is also a member of the International Women's Forum and sits on the President's Council of Cornell Women. In 2013, Beth was named one of the 100 most powerful women in Canada in the corporate board category. She received a Bachelor of the Arts degree in Medieval and Renaissance European History from Cornell University and an MBA degree from Harvard Business School. Please join me in welcoming Beth with a round of applause.
Thanks very much, Beth. Can everybody hear me? Okay, I see lots of nods, but you can be vocal, it's okay. Just before I start, just to get an idea of who's here, and I was chatting with a few of you earlier, who's pursuing a degree in the sciences? Okay. Who's pursuing a degree in law? Okay, and what about business? Anybody business? Okay, did I not cover anything? Any field in the humanities, liberal arts, or other? Okay, not too many. Okay, good. Yeah? Okay. So it's good to see such a diverse group, and it's great to be staring out at this amazing vista. I love coming back to campus. I'm going to speak for about 20 minutes about my life's journey and some lessons I've learned along the way, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So my remarks are structured around 4 key observations. First, fulfillment in life and in your career starts with knowing who you are. Second, we all must deal with stress and adversity. It's how we do it that matters. And here I'll talk about some of the obstacles faced by women. Third, both sponsorship and risk-taking have been critical to my career success. And here I'll talk about not only what's worked for me, but some of the support systems available to all women, and actually even beyond women, who take initiative in their careers. And finally, I'll talk about how positive energy fuels more positive energy and makes every day of your life a better one. So to go back to my first insight, fulfillment in life and in your career starts with knowing who you are, and also knowing that who you are and what your priorities are will likely change over time. I knew from an early age that I liked art and history and learning about other cultures. I was raised in a New York suburb, and I was fortunate to be exposed to the arts and to cultural diversity at an early age. But it wasn't until I was 15 during my first trip to Europe that I had an epiphany. When I visited the Tower of London, I felt transported to another time, and I was very eerily at home learning about dramatic events that had occurred some 500 years prior. That fascination led me to study medieval and Renaissance European history here at Cornell with a minor in art history. And after Cornell, I worked in Manhattan at Japan Society, a nonprofit with programs exploring the political, social, cultural, and economic relationships between the US and Japan. What attracted me initially was the cultural side. They had an art gallery, film center, and a performing arts program, but what really kept me engaged after a while turned out to be the business side. So this is going back to, I know before probably most of you were born, but back in the early 1980s, Japan was revolutionizing the auto industry with just-in-time inventory and quality circles and other advanced manufacturing techniques. And I discovered that I was really interested in what was making them so successful at a time when the North American auto industry was struggling with quality issues and increased foreign competition, particularly from Japan. I was also becoming interested in marketing since my job involved fundraising and special events. And after a few years, loving my job, I found myself being recruited for a more senior job at a much larger institution, the American Museum of Natural History. So there I was, and I had a turning point. I had to make a decision. Did I continue with a career in nonprofit management or make a career change and apply to business school? So my soul searching led me to the conclusion that it would be preferable to work full-time in for-profit and pursue nonprofit in my spare time than working full-time in nonprofit and trying to pursue for-profit in my spare time. So that's what led me to apply to business school and attend Harvard. My journey of self-discovery continued at Harvard, and I credit a course that was taught by Professor Jeffrey Sonnenfeld in career management with a lot of that self-discovery. The course involved essays, working with a partner to explore your past, and diagnostic tests like strong interest inventory. And I realized through all of this work and through distilling it into creating my life themes that what I really wanted to do was work at a global, customer-focused service company with a strong brand. I also knew that I loved interacting with other highly motivated people. And that led me to American Express, which is a great brand and a dynamic environment. I had a great 22-and-a-half-year career at Amex, and I'll get to that a bit later, but I am often asked whether I encountered any obstacles in my career. And so that brings me to my second insight. We must all deal with stress and adversity. It's how we do it that matters. I'm going to share a personal story about a low point in my career, as well as some general observations on challenges faced particularly by women in the workplace, and then get into a few of my own favorite tactics for dealing with stress. In the 1990s, I found myself working for a managing director in Amex's international banking subsidiary, who was widely known to have biases against women, particularly intelligent and assertive women. I was told that I asked too many why questions, and I was discouraged from solving key challenges involving product profitability and servicing issues. The environment for me was very demotivating, and I think that the managing director was hoping I would quit. However, my approach was to persevere, confident that I would ultimately be able to move again internally, because this was not my first job within Amex. It was actually my third job. In the meantime, I decided to make the best of the situation. I volunteered for assignments where I saw considerable potential value, but others did not. And for me, that was a strategy to get me through this. For example, the business wanted to do market research with private banking clients, but this had never been done, since if you think about it, the private banking relationship managers were very unwilling to allow access to their clients. And I think they had a number of reasons for that. But my approach was to embark on a road trip to all of our major markets around the world, to educate them on the benefits they would gain from the research. For example, they would have data to justify investments to fix operational issues which really bothered their clients. And if they just anecdotally told stories about this is wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, they would get no traction. But having the aggregate data could actually get dollars flowing. And so we assured them complete confidentiality of client-specific information and responses, and we were able to do the research. And the insights and the action items were so rich that the president of the business unit, who was the boss of the managing director I worked for, took an interest in the project and in my career advancement. Also during this period, 5 of us started the first Amex Women's Network. And I was asked by the members to head the Career Development Committee, which gave me some additional visibility. So ultimately, I was able to go back to the card business, and my career was back on track. In recent years, through my involvement as a member of the Catalyst Canada Advisory Board, which Beth alluded to earlier, I now have access to research that explains the challenges encountered by women in the workforce. So I'm going to mention a few briefly. There is something called the double-bind dilemma that hinders the advancement of women. And in some ways, this explains what happened to me. In the double-bind dilemma, women may be stereotyped and judged to lack certain behaviors that are desirable in senior roles, such as assertiveness or the ability to fit in and perform in male-dominated environments. However, if they do exhibit those very behaviors, they're often judged to be aggressive rather than assertive, or even, dare I say, bitchy. Now, this is all backed up by research, and the research report is called The Double-Blind Dilemma for Women in Leadership, Damned If You Do, Doomed If You Don't. Another obstacle that women encounter is the fact that women tend to be judged primarily based on past performance, whereas men are also assessed on their potential. So this explains why people in decision-making roles may be more willing to take a risk on a man seeking a major promotion, but when a woman is a candidate, the fact that she's never done it before becomes much more of an issue. And this is very subtle and subconscious stuff. This is not stuff that people are even aware that they're doing. Not only is this unconscious bias unfair to women, but it hurts organizations because they're failing to leverage all the potential talent at their disposal. The Catalyst report that addresses this obstacle is called Cascading Gender Biases, Compounding Effects, an Assessment of Talent Management Systems. Another obstacle faced by women is that we generally have less access than men to powerful networks, less access to the inner circle of desirable sponsors, the influential executives who are often, but not always, still men, who make the decisions that can impact our career advancement. So that's clearly some of the bad news of what we are up against. And I'll address the supports we can access to break through these obstacles in a moment. But first, I want to talk a bit about what I do to deal with stress. So for me, mornings are my time to de-stress and energize. My ritual is quiet time with the dog, reading the papers, over coffee and breakfast, and then working out. And I find that working out is not only great for my health and for managing stress, but it's often when I have some of my most creative ideas. So since leaving the corporate world, I no longer do this at the insane hour of 4:30 in the morning, but I started at the much saner hour of 6 a.m. And I try also in my daily life to savor the simple moments and focus on being present, whether it's playing with my dog, taking a romantic walk with my husband, or even catching up with a mentee over coffee. My third insight deals with my own career success, how I navigated some of the obstacles, and what may work for you. So both sponsorship and risk-taking have been critical to my career success. Let's jump back for a moment to the story of how I landed my job at American Express after receiving my MBA. Although I didn't realize it at the time, I was beginning to experience the wonderful power of sponsorship. While I was at Japan Society, after Cornell, I worked closely with a trustee, Martha Redfield Wallace, who was responsible for Japan Society's 75th anniversary celebration. We forged a great relationship, and I learned a great deal from her, and she also became a wonderful role model for me. She was a pioneering woman corporate director. She sat on the boards of Chemical Bank, which is now part of Chase, Bristol-Myers, and American Express, among others. She taught me how to drive results at the board level of a nonprofit, how to network effectively and make connections, and I saw her in action. Actually, doing things like selling tables for events or getting renowned speakers to participate. She knew how to work a room, she knew how to hold her own, and she had a commanding presence. Of course, she was almost 6 feet tall, which helped, but I tried nonetheless to learn some of these lessons. She was also willing to give me career advice, and we kept in touch after I entered Harvard. So when I told Martha that I was interested in working at American Express after graduation, she helped me get an interview for a much sought-after position as assistant manager in worldwide marketing and communications. At the time, I thought I had used my network to get my foot in the door, but now I know that I had both a role model and a valuable early sponsor in Martha. I'm sometimes asked, what is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor? A sponsor is much more than a mentor. A mentor provides advice and can coach you on building skills, but a mentor may lack the power and influence to advance your career. A sponsor is well-placed and influential and knows your skills well enough to advocate for you, often in situations and during discussions that you're not even aware are occurring. The best sponsorship relationships develop organically, and at this stage in your career, a particularly supportive professor can become an effective sponsor for you. As I learned, a sponsor can be a huge asset to your career, but learning to take risks also helped me. Years ago, when I graduated from business school, a lot of companies had very structured tracks for advancement. So like Procter & Gamble, you'd spend time as an assistant brand manager, then you'd get promoted to brand manager, and then maybe product manager, and so on. But that never appealed to me. That was much too structured. At Amex, you could cut a less traditional path if you took the initiative, and I was fortunate to do that. Of course, there was a lot of work and long hours and a constant push for driving results. And I learned a tremendous amount from the people I worked for and from my colleagues at all levels of the organization. And the opportunities to learn energized me so much that I eagerly sought them out. So, was there a business challenge with no known solution? Sign me up. Were we starting a new line of business for which we had absolutely no roadmap? Great, let me help create that. 1 week to develop a bid strong enough to win a key high-profile partnership over all of our competitors? Fantastic, let's do that. So that was always my philosophy. And it opened doors, it created great opportunities, and it allowed me to build a personal brand as someone up for a challenge who could also drive tangible results. So within the, overall protective cocoon of Amex, I did take a lot of risks. But I was also fortunate to work for someone who became my most important sponsor. I met Jim Cracchiolo, who is now CEO of Ameriprise in Minneapolis in the late 1980s when he joined the business unit I was working in at American Express. I was responsible for a very successful lending product, and I did have P&L responsibility, which research also suggests if you're in the business world, getting P&L, profit and loss responsibility early in your career is a huge indicator for future potential advancement. So I had the P&L for that product, and he was the recently named CFO of the business unit, but his aspirations were beyond finance. So he negotiated to have my product reporting into him, with him serving as general manager and keeping his CFO role. I learned a lot from him, and he credited me with teaching him about marketing, so it was mutually beneficial. And I think the best sponsorship relationships can be mutually beneficial. So don't forget that you have things to offer and to add. While we parted company in our next Amex roles and went to different subsidiaries, we did stay in touch, and he mentored me through some tough situations, such as the one I described a few minutes back when I was working for that biased managing director. After working in the international banking subsidiary, I actually had a choice between two different Amex opportunities for my next role. One was working for Jim again in quality and re-engineering, and the other working as head of new product development for the consumer lending business. Both were equivalent roles in terms of title and salary, and it was the first time I met with Amex's current CEO, Ken Chenault, who was then second in command, to discuss my career decisions. So here was the true meaning of sponsorship, meeting with my sponsor's sponsor. Ken very subtly steered me to the re-engineering role, and through that I learned a great deal more about the business and about change management. So now let's fast forward. I'm 17 years into my Amex career. I'm living in London as Senior Vice President for International Product Strategy and Development, traveling the world and very happy with my career. And then something happened that made me re-examine life and my priorities. September 11th, 2001 afflicted me with what I call New Yorker's guilt. It was difficult knowing what the city was going through when I was so far away in London. So I asked for a transfer back to New York, and Amex was extremely accommodating, allowing me to do the same job. After about 6 months, New York was starting to get back on its feet, and I got the proverbial tap on the shoulder from Jim, again, who was now very senior and 2 levels above me, and asked me if I had thought about the open job in Canada as president and CEO of the Canadian business. A true sponsor, he saw the opportunity as a great fit for me, even before I did. And he encouraged me to go for it and back my candidacy amidst considerable competition. Of course, it worked out well, and I can thank him in a way for the career that's led me to be with you today and share these stories. But if I go back to that point in time, as I read the requirements for the Amex CEO role, which I believe there were 10 of, what I didn't realize is that I very nearly fell into a trap that holds many women back. There was a study done by Hewlett-Packard a few years ago that found that while men will apply for a role if they have 6 out of 10 requirements listed, and there is nothing wrong with that, they should go for it. We should all, but the point is we should all go for it if we want to. Women often feel they need all or nearly all of the 10 on the list. So if that's ever happened to you, take a step back and ask yourself, should you have held yourself back, or should you have competed and taken a risk that maybe you wouldn't get it, but maybe, just maybe you would? So this reticence can hold women back from pursuing some excellent opportunities. While I nearly fell into that trap, I didn't, and I was very lucky. I realized I had at least 8 of the 10, and I also had Jim as a sponsor. So I did apply. So what else can work for women beyond taking initiative and cultivating an influential and effective sponsor? One of the most obvious supports available to all of you is to gain strong credentials, which is precisely what you're doing. So the credentials that you're gaining now, the degrees, are going to be really, really powerful in your careers. And my Cornell education and Harvard MBA were certainly a help to me as well, but more so than appears on the surface, because not only are you gaining important skill sets with your degree, but you are also building one of the most important networks that you will have in your entire life. So it's going to last you for the rest of your life. You'll be able to leverage it for the rest of your life if you continue to invest in and nurture it. The same is true for the other networks you'll form throughout your career. More recently, some women have turned to another strategy to take charge of their career path, and this works for men as well, which is forming a personal board of directors. Since I haven't done this, I can't speak from experience, but more and more women have told me about their experiences in doing this. Some people form groups with others who work in the same field but in non-competing roles, and they serve as each other's boards. Others just seek advice from a circle of individuals who never meet formally as a group, but who often provide valuable and complementary insights in various areas where they need help. So some of the benefits could be getting insight from someone who's experienced a situation that you've never been in before, someone who has an area of expertise that you don't have and want to learn more about, getting candid feedback from someone who knows you extremely well and has watched you grow over a long period of time, and getting advice and support during career transitions. After this session, you're going to get an email with links to helpful articles, including 2 on this topic, and also including the research reports I mentioned earlier, in case you're interested in learning more. So I want to talk now a bit about my decision to leave full-time corporate life and why I'm so happy doing what I do now, which is sitting on both nonprofit and corporate boards and advocating for more women on boards. So this section will shed light on my 4th observation. Positive energy fuels more positive energy and makes every day of your life better. It also ties back to my first observation regarding how your priorities can change over time. As I said earlier, I loved my career at Amex, particularly the role leading the Canadian business, which I knew walking into it was a 3 to 5 year assignment. So 3 years into the role, I started to take a step back and ponder what I wanted to do next. By this point in life, my priorities had begun to change. I had accomplished more than I ever dreamed of from a business perspective, and I was thoroughly enjoying my life in Toronto, both socially and my engagement with nonprofits. My parents were then in their late 80s, and I wanted a more flexible schedule so I could spend additional time visiting them in Florida. So since I loved working with nonprofit boards, I decided to leverage my professional experience to serve on corporate boards as a second career. The decision to leave Amex after such a great career was not taken lightly, but through consultation with some trusted friends and colleagues in a position to give me good advice. And I knew I was already getting positive feedback serving on nonprofit boards and realized I had good skills to offer around the corporate board table. So in addition to the 2 corporate boards that I serve on, HSBC Bank Canada and Aimia, I sit on the advisory board of the Women's Venture Capital Fund, and I sit on about 5 nonprofit boards. On the nonprofit side, I've derived the most satisfaction from my deep involvement with a major museum called the Art Gallery of Ontario, and in co-chairing a committee for the Harvard Business School Club of Toronto. This is a committee that each year awards scholarships to leaders in nonprofit organizations in Toronto. And over the years, we've sent dozens of Toronto's nonprofit leaders to the course, and they've returned having a greater impact on the community through their work in social services, education, the arts, and more. One of the things that makes nonprofit work and board work so fun for me and motivating is the opportunity to give back, of course, and support the causes that I'm passionate about. But there's another insight, and that is around the positive energy that you feel when you're engaged in a nonprofit. Because think about it, most people who spend their careers in nonprofit are not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they have a great passion and desire to help and have an impact. So having positive energy and a positive outlook, I think, can really help determine our level of stress and our overall health. For example, you can look at what's happening in the world today and say there's nothing but bad news. Struggling economies, war, terrorism, global climate change, natural disasters, and a very scary election. But you can also look at the bright spots, the inspirational acts like relief efforts after natural disasters, scientific progress including renewable energy and stem cell research, and have hope for mankind in the future. So I have concluded that I am overall an optimist. As I said, one of the big benefits of being involved in nonprofits is the positive energy. To be surrounded by these passionate people is a natural high, and it's also contagious. So if you're not already doing so, when you have the time, which I know may not be at this point in your career, I do recommend getting involved and contributing your energies and talents to the community. You're going to get a great psychic and emotional reward, but you'll also be building your personal brand in important ways. Before I close, I want to say a few words about family and friends who have had, of course, a profound impact on my life. One of the most positive and powerful influences in my life was my mother, who I lost late last year. She truly empowered me from an early age. Not only did she do a wonderful job raising my handicapped sister, who has been blind from birth, but she had the right balance of confidence and humility and taught me fundamental values like inclusion, charity, freedom of choice, personal responsibility, the value of an education, and compassion. Together, she and my father gave me the confidence to believe I could do just about anything I set my mind to. She was an important source of advice and support to me, and I was fortunate to have her in my life for so long. And I credit much of my career success to her and her positive energy. I'm also blessed to be in a fabulous marriage with my second, and I always tell him, my final husband. I met Pat in 2008, and he is everything I learned over time that I wanted in a relationship. He's attractive, smart, funny, and more honest than a Boy Scout. In fact, he is a former West Point cadet, an Army officer, and we're going to his reunion after this, who has amazing integrity, great athleticism, and shares my interest in art, travel, hiking, and wine. We married in 2014 and enjoy life with our adorable Jack Russell Pug mix rescue dog, Picasso. And finally, friends. I have amazing friends in Toronto, in New York, and elsewhere. But I confess there was a time in my life when I was so busy, I didn't make enough time for them. And I think that as we get caught up in the fabric of life, building careers, families, traveling for work, relocating, etc., it's easy to lose touch with close friends from childhood and university. And while I was leading what I call the 24/7 life, all but a few close friends took a back seat to the press of the everyday and the many responsibilities, obligations, and deadlines that I had. For me, though, there was a moment that brought good friends back into my life and helped me adjust my priorities. When we turned 40, one of my high school friends organized a reunion for 10 of us who had been very close in high school but had drifted apart a bit over the years. The first weekend back together was awesome, and we now do it every year in a different location. And just a few months ago, we were in the Berkshires and had an amazing time. We are there to support each other through life's triumphs and tragedies, and I'm blessed to have these amazing women in my life. I suppose in many ways, as I think back, that they are my own personal board of directors, even though a lot of our discussions are not related to professional activities. So in closing, we all search for that elusive balance, and I'm reminded of a quote attributed to George Carlin. Life is not measured in the number of breaths we take, but in the moments that take our breath away. No matter how busy you are building your career, your family, or both, please make sure that you aren't too busy to enjoy life right now. Give back to the community, help others, and make sure you're living and enjoying the present with those whom you love. For me, that's a powerful key to balance and happiness. Thank you. So I did promise time for Q&A. That took a little longer than I thought. And I have some pre-submitted questions. So how about if we start with the pre-submitted question and then we can just trade off a live one from the audience back to pre-submitted, et cetera. Okay. So the first one is one that I sort of covered in my talk, but I'll elaborate a little bit. Can you describe a time when you have failed or faced a huge setback? How do you feel about failure? What can be learned from it? Do you have any advice for overcoming these inevitable moments? So the story I shared about working for that managing director, there was a particular part that was very frustrating for me. I was asked to market a product that wasn't properly operationally supported. And I kept trying to get the product people and the operations people together in the same room to agree on how to fix this. And they would not come together and work on a solution. So I didn't realize all of the tools available. In retrospect, I should have gone to internal audit and said, we can't launch a product that's not properly supported. There were other things I could have done. But I certainly didn't do the marketing materials at that point because I felt from an integrity perspective that I couldn't. And it did hurt me not to have done that. I raised all the red flags, I explained what the issues were, and I said, look, I've tried to fix it and I can't. So how did I overcome that low point? I looked for those opportunities that were undervalued, where I saw value. So there was the market research to private banking clients. There was another project creating a product development process that was cross-functional from the get-go, that was called a process improvement team, which no one wanted to volunteer for, but I did because I knew it would fix the problem that I had raised that wasn't recognized, and that went on to also become a great success. So I guess the lesson learned for me is, one is look for ways to raise issues that are outside your normal channels, but also look for areas to add value that may be overlooked and that can help you become recognized for your successes again. Is there a question from the audience? Yes?
What methods have you found most useful for developing your assertiveness and confidence? Have you had any special training for it, or just through watching mentors or practice?
Okay, so this one's a good one because It's hard to believe, but I was not particularly assertive when I was at Cornell. I was a very diligent history student. I took my notes, I studied with my friends, but I don't know that I ever said I'm sure I said a few things in class. I'm not sure I ever said that much. When I got into Harvard, I found out that 50% of your grade was based on classroom participation. So I realized that if I didn't start speaking up for myself, I was going to flunk out. And there's no greater realization to motivate you, to take risks and get beyond your comfort space than that kind of fear that you're going to be hampering your own personal success. So later in life, I had media training and other things, other supports. But I think it's really a matter of challenging yourself. Set specific challenges. If there are places where you're not comfortable speaking up, start asking yourself why. Is it because you haven't prepared enough to have what you want to say? Like, break it apart, take it apart, and then put it together and use it, is what I would say. So another question from the pre-submitted. How do we get the message out to women of this generation to help them understand the glass ceilings still do exist and we all have to do our part to break them? That there is power if we all work together, and that this fight is not our mother's fight, but everyone's still. So I think we have a really good teachable moment right now, and that is looking at the campaign and looking at the sexism directed at Hillary Clinton. So there is criticism, and some of that is deserved, but criticism and sexism are not the same, and none of that sexism is deserved. So if you look at some of the shouts at the rallies, if you look at some of the T-shirts that say, Trump that B word, and other things that are extremely sexist and violent and angry in their rhetoric, then you know that there is still sexism here. We have not solved it. And so if any of your friends say that's over, tell them not only are we having a teachable moment as a nation, but that the data will say that in almost every professional field, and I think every professional field, really, according to Catalyst, women have made progress over the past several decades, but only to a point. If you look at women on boards, we're stuck at the high teens, low 20s. If you look at women in senior management roles, women as law partners, we are stuck, and the progress is glacial, and if it continues at the current pace, it'll take generations to reach gender parity. So this is not over. I don't know if that helps. I hope it does, but it's not over. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Thinking about that question, and then also previous experience with, as you put it, a very biased individual. I mean, you had a way of working around that, but when you're dealing with an explicitly sexist situation, is it worth it to say this is sexist, this is wrong, and this is not being judged on an equal basis, or is it sometimes just more? I mean, how do you decide whether to confront it head on like that, or to maybe try those alternate routes like you described?
Yeah, I think it was harder, 20, 25 years ago to confront it head on. I do think you have to be delicate in how you do it, though, because unfortunately, some of these unconscious biases result in assertiveness being viewed as I said, as being aggressive or bitchy. So it's not easy. But the first thing I would do is, if it's an individual, I would sit that person down and say, can we have coffee? And then say, you know what? I got to be honest. There are great things about working with you, A, B, and C. But there are also things that are making me uncomfortable. And you are probably not even aware of these, but I'd really like to share my perspective with you and explain why. And see what they say. Oh, my watch is telling me I have a phone call, which of course I'm not going to take. But I don't know if that's helpful to you. But if you want to be direct, I would say do it in the right environment, but don't be shy about doing it if you do it with positive intent and in the right way. So the worst that can happen is that person denies it or says, I don't know what you're talking about. But at least you've started to wake that person up. And if you have a mentor, definitely discuss it with your mentor. Yes?
So piggybacking on that, in Cornell, we have the bias reporting system.
Okay.
Is there anything like that going on for corporate world?
Well, most corporations have diversity and inclusion initiatives. Most of them also have ethics hotlines, so if you think somebody's crossed an ethical or value boundary, you can certainly report that. So there are some mechanisms. Yes, thank you. I'm going to go to another one from the pre-submitted, because these are so good. How do you know if you're receiving competitive pay for your first job? Have you seen evidence of unequal pay between genders? To answer the second one first, yes, that evidence is well documented. It's documented by field. It's documented in aggregate. I think there is a day that's now called Equal Pay Day, which is sometime in April, which is basically the number of extra days women on average, not in specific fields, it's specific jobs, but women on average have to work to reach the pay level of men in the prior calendar year. So how do you know if your first offer is competitive? A few things you can do. One is go to glassdoor.com. It's not perfect, but people post data at specific companies for specific jobs, and if there's enough data for what you're applying for, you can take a look and see where you stand. It's also important to realize that there are different levels of experience even for the same job title, so that can come into play. So that after you have a written offer, definitely not before, you can ask some questions. Ask what's the range for this position? What's the pay range for this position, and where do you fall? And how have they applied your education and experience to arrive at the starting salary that they have offered you? And I think that will probably get them to reflect on whether it's a fair offer. And if they don't want to share any information with you, I'd say that's a cause for concern. Question from the audience? Yes.
What essentially inspired you to create the women's forum that you did at American Express, and what is the result of that you've seen moving forward?
Thanks, that's a very good question. So this was in approximately 1993, maybe-ish. Yeah, as I mentioned, the environment at this particular subsidiary, which has since been sold to Standard Chartered Bank, was pretty hostile to women. And there were 5 of us that would go to lunch regularly to give each other moral support. We were some of the more senior women at the bank at that time. And we did get a lot of good psychic support from those lunches. We also noticed that when men saw us together, they responded differently than when they saw us individually. They were like, oh, okay, there's something's happening here. And for those who, for our friends, they were like, great, great that you're having lunch together. For those who were a little bit more hostile to women, it gave them a pause because they realized there was untapped potential power in these women getting together. So we decided to form the network, and we called it WIN, for Women's Issues Network. It's now called WIN for Women's Interests Network, because I like to think most of the issues have gone away. So it was rebranded at some point. And it still exists at Amex. It started in the International Bank, American Express International Banking Corporation. It's now company-wide. So hope that helps. How can you be part of social situations that bosses and certain colleagues are participating in outside of work? Well, first, if it makes you more comfortable, try to make sure that at least one other woman is going and that it's at a location where you feel comfortable. But what I would say is that socializing is part of the work environment. It's a great way to get to know your colleagues, get to know what they do outside of work, talk about their families, about their interests, about their vacations, maybe more so than you could do, if you're having a quick 5-minute coffee chat. So it is part of socializing, but you should never be in a situation that makes you uncomfortable. And I think that there's less and less of that these days. Any other questions from the audience? And if you have to go to make a class, please do that. Yes?
So I am a scientist, and a lot of the types of work or how we transmit our data is through presentations, and
science is a very male-dominated field. And so in the past, a lot of my advisors have always commented on my voice inflection and my like shaky voice, and felt like my height makes it like less likely for me to be taken seriously.
Your height?
Yeah, because I'm very short. and
Well,
so-
I doubt you're much shorter than I am, really.
Yeah.
Here, I can take my heels off.
Yeah, but like they always comment that I need to do a lot more in order to be taken seriously. And as CEO, I am the guy you've led a lot of meetings where it was mostly men in the room. So how would you assert that your ideas are valid and you are like a competent leader?
Yeah. So I had a related question that was submitted in advance, which I'm going to read, and I'm going to respond and see if I get to your answer as well. What advice could you offer to a young professional woman who does not see eye to eye with her boss or manager? What is a tactful approach to expressing her opinion while still being respectful? How do you know when to speak up in meetings in the office, lab, or workplace, and when to listen? As someone who is new to Cornell in my PhD lab group, this is something I've wondered quite often. So, first of all, I think when it comes to presenting, there are many ways that you can gain confidence. There are probably, I'm hoping at Cornell, there are some workshops available for people who present where you can go and get critiqued on videotape and people can say, here are recommendations. Because everybody, when they're starting out, me included, is not a confident presenter. So it's a skill that whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're short or tall, you've got to learn over time. Being a short woman, yes, it does present extra challenges, but there are definitely skills and techniques that you can learn to become a more effective presenter. When it comes to disagreeing respectfully, sometimes the best way is the Socratic method of asking questions. Okay, it's a non-threatening way of asserting your perspective, and it's just as common in the boardroom actually, because a lot of times as board members, we don't want to intimidate management because management and the CEO are accountable to the board. And the last thing, if you're discussing a delicate issue that you want to do, is intimidate management so that you don't get to the root of it and they're not candid. So I often use the Socratic method. And I think that if you have a point of view in your lab that's different, you could say something like, could you please explain to me why we are doing X, which is their choice, instead of Y, which is your choice. So you're stating your opinion, but you're doing it in the form of a question that asks somebody to explain to you what's going on, and at the same time gets them to sort of maybe take a step back and say, well, is X really better than Y, or should I have thought of Y, without it coming across as being too aggressive or intimidating or threatening. So hopefully that's helpful. Did I get to it at all? Kind of? Okay. It's hard because you do have to put work into it. I am not saying that your professor, whoever's giving you feedback, is right. They're not right. And especially height has nothing to do with it. So use me as an example. Say, my height has nothing to do with it. I saw a 5-foot-tall former CEO of a bank speak, and her height had nothing to do with where she got in her career. So why do you think it has anything to do with where I'm going to get?
Well, yeah, but like if you're speaking to someone at a conference, that like if they have to like bend down to like listen to you or maybe you.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. It's just
Part of that is voice projection. That is something you can practice, and whether you're 5 feet tall or 6 feet tall, if you're 6 feet tall and you don't speak loudly and you're at a conference, everybody's going to go like this, even if you're 6 feet tall. Part of that is voice projection and getting a good microphone, and that can take care. And if you're at a conference and you have to speak and they don't mic you up, that's something that it's really wrong, and you should be asking in advance for that kind of support. Okay? Okay. Back to the list. What are 3 things that I can do today that will help me advance in my career and in life? So quickly, number 1, as I mentioned earlier, know yourself. If you have to do some diagnostics, if you're not sure you're on the right path, if you still have questions, I think for most of you, you know by this point you love what you do. But if you're not sure, take some diagnostics like the Strong Interest Inventory. I won't tell you a lot about it. You can find out online. In the interest of time, I'll keep going. Secondly, develop a sponsor for this stage in your career. I talked about the importance of supportive professors or even a fellow PhD student who's further ahead and is very supportive. Any of those people can become important sponsors. And number 3, develop a strong professional network and keep doing that, because that'll come back to help you in ways that you cannot even anticipate as you go through your career. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Could you speak more about the sponsors and mentors, like maybe some of your top tips or tricks on how to start those networks and how to maintain?
So as I mentioned, a sponsor is somebody who's well positioned to advocate for you because they have the power and influence to positively influence your career trajectory. And I gave you 2 examples from my own past. But the best way I have found is you have to cultivate those relationships organically. They're not somebody that you meet for the first time over coffee and then they become a sponsor because you have a great chat. It's somebody who has seen your work, who knows your work. So the universe around you is where you start looking. You start looking at who are the professors you've had, who have you connected with, who's open to you coming in after class or after a lab and asking for support and advice. And once you find those connections where they seem to think you've got something genuine to offer, keep cultivating that relationship in a very positive professional manner. Keep asking for advice. If you're applying for grants, if you're applying to other programs, ask for recommendations. Develop the bonds where you know they're going to help you and advocate for you and where they know enough about you to do that. Is that helpful? Okay, good. Thanks. What's the best way to seek a mentor when first starting a new job? And that's the last one that was submitted. First, you can inquire into any formal mentoring programs the organization may have. But if there aren't any, I would go and ask your immediate boss for a recommendation of someone who's a few years ahead of you in the same career path that you can learn from. Because that's often the best way, especially early on, to understand the lay of the land, how they got themselves established and started to build their reputation within the organization, and they'll have the best, I think, tips and advice. So, any others from the audience? Okay, if not, then I want to thank you all for your time. I hope I stood close enough to the microphone. And it's been a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thanks for your great questions. Really appreciate that.